Every One Piece fan knows the three fundamental types of Haki: Armament, Observation, and Conquerors. But that's just the surface. In this video, we're breaking down the full spectrum of Haki abilities, including the rare and powerful forms that give the series' strongest characters their edge. And where better to start than with the most hyped Haki of all, Conqueror's Haki. Also called the Supreme King's Haki, this ability is the coldest of the three. It's also the only one you can't grind or train your way into, because only one in several million are born with it. The basic application of this Haki is the raw weaponization of a person's willpower. It manifests as an invisible wave that can stagger, overwhelm, or outright knock out anyone with a weaker spirit. Or, in plain English, it's aura farming. And one of the cleanest examples of this aura farming comes from Shanks, who flexed his Conqueror's Haki by simply stepping onto Whitebeard's ship, the Moby Dick. Just by walking through, crew members dropped like flies, and the ship itself began to crack under the pressure. You could literally see the wood splintering on the deck. Another perfect example is when Luffy took out 50,000 Fishman goons without moving an inch. But perhaps the single greatest example is from chapter 1122, when Joy Boy's Conqueror's Haki from over 800 years ago was able to yeet Warkiri, Jupiter, and Nezjuro back to Marijoa, while also bringing Emu to their knees. Now, before we continue, here's the plan. We'll start with the basic application of each Haki, then get into the sub-application or advanced forms that deserve their own spot. With that said, coming up right after base Conqueror's Haki is a sub-application that you can just call Beast Taming or Domination. This ability lets you scare or even tame wild beasts with nothing but your aura. This is actually the first use of Haki we ever see, as it was shown in chapter 1 when Shanks dominated the Lord of the Coast with his Conqueror's Haki Glare. Of course, we've also seen Luffy do the same thing, like when he tamed a bull named Usi and Tsurume the Kraken. Or if you want a more recent example, it'd be chapter 1131. That's when Luffy casually tamed Loki's friends, the Beast of Elbaf's underworld. But this is still just the foundation of Conqueror's Haki. The true power lies in the advanced level, which, as Kaido declared in chapter 1010, only a handful of the strongest users can unlock. It's called infusing one's Conqueror's Haki. A handful of the strongest characters in One Piece can literally infuse their Supreme King's Haki into their attacks, similar to how they would with Armament Haki. The result is a ridiculous increase in power. You see, when a user or their weapon is infused with one's Conqueror's Haki, it's emitted invisibly by creating a layer of force that makes their attacks hit without physical contact. This also comes with that badass black lightning effect that we usually see with regular Conqueror's Haki, only now it's more intense. We first saw this back in chapter 434 when Shanks clashed with Whitebeard on the Moby Dick, which split the skies. This was also seen with Kaido's clash with Big Mom in chapter 951, but it wasn't until Roger's clash with Whitebeard in chapter 966 that we actually saw their weapons not touching as they split the skies. As for Luffy, he first figured out this ability in chapter 1010, where he was able to hurt Kaido without even touching him. Law's reaction is basically all of us when we witness that legendary moment. However, the quality of Luffy's Haki was not quite there yet. It wasn't until chapter 1026 that our boy finally cemented his Emperor level status when he split the skies during his clash with Kaido. Still, what exactly is this splitting the skies? Let's call it environment manipulation. If we continue talking about clashes that split the skies, then how about King Harold's clash with rocks, or should I say Davy x Zebek, in chapter 1155? That collision of Haki was so insane that the narrator literally said the clash between the two strangers blew everyone away within a 5-kilometer radius. Then in chapter 1158, when we saw them clashing again, the black lightning was seen encompassing over half of Elbaf, which is just ridiculous considering how Elbaf apparently stretches beyond the clouds. Now, of course, imposing one's will on the environment by splitting the skies, blowing everyone away, or overwhelming a landmass as large as Elbaf is still just a byproduct of two strong individuals with advanced Conqueror's Haki, but it's serious and consistent enough that we can consider it a subcategory of its own. Next, we're gonna talk about the color of Armament Haki, but we're not done with Conqueror's Haki. Keep watching because at the end, we're gonna talk about 3 more use cases of Conquerors, and all of them are also considered advanced applications. Anyway, so about Armament Haki. It is a form of Haki that allows the user to use their aura to create, in essence, a piece of armor around themselves, which provides incredible offensive and defensive capabilities. Basically, its users coat their arms, legs, weapons, or even their entire body, like we saw with Virgo, to increase their defensive and offensive capabilities. Once active, you can block or lessen the impact of stronger attacks, as well as throw more powerful ones. This is one of the 2 basic applications of Armament Haki, and it's called hardening. The second basic application is about extending armament into your weapons, such as swords and and guns. We call it imbuement. Imbued weapons gain a new degree of offensive power. For example, the Kuja warrior's imbued arrows can blast through solid stone. Defensively, imbuing Haki into a weapon prevents it from being damaged as easily and increases its lifespan. This is why Dracul Mihawk, the strongest swordsman in the world, told Zoro that imbuing one's sword with Armament Haki is how you prevent the blade from chipping. But the most important use case of Armament Haki is how it's absolutely essential if you want to stand a chance against Logia-type Devil Fruit users. Without it, their bodies are untouchable, unless of course your Devil Fruit just so happens to counter them, like Luffy's rubber body naturally nullifying Enel's lightning powers. But that kind of plot convenience is very uncommon. Naturally, if there's Armament Haki, there's also its stronger, more refined form, Advanced Armament Haki. In Wano, they call it Ryuo, which is built on the concept of inner flow, but it's the same thing. As explained by Hyogoro to Luffy, it's about projecting the same hardening from your body and weapons and making it flow outward. Once you figure this out, your attack gets another powerful layer of force. It's called emission, and we've been seeing it in action since before the time skip. This is what happened in chapter 511, when Sentomaru deflected Luffy's Gomu Gomu no Gatling attack without making direct contact. A couple of other neat examples include when Luffy hurts Kaido with his Red Rock in chapter 1000, and when Kobe uses his Honesty Impact in chapter 1088. But let me tell you that just because you can make your Haki flow outward doesn't mean you've mastered it. After all, there's a reason why Yamato, despite knowing both Advanced Armament and Advanced Conqueror's Haki, couldn't remove those explosive cuffs. What Yamato was missing is the level beyond Advanced Armament called Internal Destruction. This is a step above simply emitting Haki because it's about making it flow into a target's body to destroy them from the inside out. So far, we've only seen Luffy and Rayleigh use it on screen. Rayleigh used it back at Sabaody to rip off Kami's cuffs, while Luffy has shown it multiple times, like when he destroyed a tree from the inside, or when he obliterated Yamato's handcuffs before they could explode. Now, you may think we're done with Armament, but there's actually another stage. It's the forging of a black blade. The exact process is still unclear, but what we do know is that it represents the absolute pinnacle of imbuement. Throughout the entire history of One Piece, only two swords have been permanently transformed into a black blade. The first is Ryuma's legendary sword Shusui, and the second is Mihawk's Yoru. Ryuma is known as the god of the blade, and Mihawk is the strongest swordsman alive today. And what this proves is simple. Only unrivaled swordsmen have ever reached this level. And if we treat black blade forging as a stage of Haki mastery, then it may well be the technically hardest feat to accomplish in the entire series, especially when you consider that even characters like Rocks, Roger, and Shanks never turned their swords into a black blade. Finally, we arrive at the third basic type, Observation Haki. Now, while the first form of Haki ever being shown in One Piece is Shanks' Conqueror's Haki, the first form to be properly fleshed out is Observation Haki. It first comes in the Jaya arc, when Blackbeard points out that Luffy's strength doesn't match his 30 million berry bounty. Then, after Bellamy gets folded, Blackbeard further comments on Luffy's Haki, and later in Impel Down, he straight up comments that Luffy has grown since Jaya, which proves that he used Observation Haki to gauge Luffy's strength back in Jaya. Still, Blackbeard didn't explain anything, he just used the term Haki. The arc where Observation Haki is actually fleshed out is Skypiea. They call it Mantra, and we see the priests use it during the trials. There's also Aiza, who was born with it, but the most broken example is obviously Enel. He combined his master of Observation Haki with his Goro Goro no Mi to quite literally read the airwaves and basically extend his range to cover all of Skypiea. This allowed him to overhear conversations and sense everything happening on the island, and because he knew where anyone was, he could send a lightning strike there in real time. All of Skypiea was Enel's domain thanks to the synergy between his Devil Fruit and Haki mastery. Still, how well do you, as a One Piece fan, understand Observation Haki? You see, Observation Haki isn't just one flat ability. It has 4 different forms of sensing. One can sense their opponent's presence, strength, emotion, and even intent. The most common use is presence sensing. According to Rayleigh, fully mastering this ability lets a user see people even if they're hidden from view or too far away to see naturally. Basically, this type of Haki allows the user to see another person through their aura, whether they're behind a building or strategically camouflaged. For example, when Usopp shot Sugar from across Dressrosa, he saw her aura and the auras of Luffy and Law in a moment of pure focus, which, of course, allowed him to pull off an otherwise impossible shot. One thing to keep in mind is that while it's called sensing presence, the users themselves describe presences as voices. They can typically tell if specific people are alive, dead, or close to death based on whether they can still hear them. For example, in chapter 1043, when Luffy's heart stopped during his awakening, Momonosuke thought he died died because he couldn't hear Luffy's voice anymore. The next type is strength sensing, which is what you use to gauge a person's power. This is what Blackbeard did to confirm that Luffy's Haki had grown stronger since the Jaya arc. This ability isn't just for humans either. When Big Mom sensed the aura of Oden's sword Enma in chapter 1002, she low-key freaked out and told Kaido to watch out. Now, when you think about it, there is not much difference between sensing presence and strength. Anyone who can do one should be able to do the other. But the next form, emotion sensing, makes things trickier. This is a unique variation of observation Haki that lets users feel and empathize with the emotions and nature of others. For example, Otohime used it to sense the suffering in a thief's heart and hear the screams from Fisher Tigers. Aiza from Skypiea was able to sense Wiper's aggressive nature, and it's how Fujitora knew the citizens of Dressrosa were just putting on a facade to help the Straw Hats escape. But when you pair this ability with presence sensing, it can be very traumatic, especially if you can't consciously control it. You become vulnerable to passively feeling the negative emotions of others, like the fear, pain, and hate from people dying around you. This is what happened to Kobe at Marineford when he unconsciously locked his ability to sense presence and emotions. Just like that, he was completely overwhelmed by the voices of everyone. The same thing happened to Aiza in chapter 265 when she started feeling voices disappearing in real time. Finally, there's intense sensing. This ability, especially effective against an opponent's bloodlust or killing intent, lets a user predict what an opponent is about to do just seconds before they do it. Wait, isn't that future sight? No, not quite. We'll get to future sight in a minute, but this is just pseudo precognition. Think of it this way: the more killing intent an enemy gives off, the more predictable they become. But it doesn't give you a literal vision of what's gonna happen. Predict is the key word here, not see. And since it relies on sensing conscious intent, any actions done unconsciously or without clear direction cannot be predicted. This is exactly how Luffy basically unlocked Ultra Instinct against Enel. He simply shut his mind off and vibed. Of course, these forms of sensing are also interconnected. When Rayleigh trained Luffy with a blindfold, Luffy had to combine intent sensing with emotion sensing to dodge his attacks. But not every observation Haki user has mastery over all these forms. It's a spectrum. Usopp and Dressrosa could sense presences, while Otohime specialized in emotions, yet neither had broad mastery of observation Haki overall. Meanwhile, you have Sanji, who is so slick with observation Haki that it's actually kinda crazy. In chapter 862, Sanji casually dodges Katakuri's jelly bean shot and just glares straight at him. Imagine being so subtle and slick with your basic observation mastery that you can stump a future sight user. And speaking of future sight, that's the hacks you get once after advancing observation Haki. It lets a user see a short period into the future. Again, instead of just sensing or predicting what'll happen, you can literally see a precise mental image of the next few seconds. The vision is so clear that the user can even hear any words that'll be spoken. According to Rayleigh, this ability has to be learned in the heat of battle, and Luffy versus Katakuri was exactly that. Fighting a high-level opponent with future sight and incredible stakes forced Luffy to experience a Haki bloom, where he became proficient in future sight as well. However, the most unreal use case so far comes from Shanks. His mastery pushes future sight way further than anyone else we've seen. In chapter 1079, when Kid tries to fire off his damn punk, Shanks sees it coming well in advance. And so before Kid can even pull the trigger, Shanks appears and one-shots him along with his damned punk. But as broken as future sight is, it's not invincible. There's one advanced form of Conqueror's Haki that can actually negate it. It's called observation killing. This technique allows a user to control their own aura, or presence, to the point that it completely blinds an opponent's ability to see into the future with observation Haki. So far, the only confirmed user is Shanks, the Haki King himself, although I bet we'll see many more in the future. Now, observation killing is just one of 3 advanced applications of Conqueror's Haki that I said I'll explain at the end. The second is something we'll call tying. This ability allows a user to tie a concentrated burst of their Conqueror's Haki into a knot. When the knot is untied, the Haki is unleashed in a powerful burst that knocks out anyone with a weaker will. It's just like a standard Conqueror's Haki blast, but tying it into a knot allows you to store it for what can be an indefinite period of time. This is how Joy Boy's Haki from over 8 centuries ago was able to yeet the Gorosei and bring Imu to their knees in chapter 1122. Now, the last advanced Conqueror's technique we're covering is what I'm gonna call Haki Imprint. The name isn't confirmed yet, but the idea makes sense because based on what we saw Gabin do against Summers in chapter 1148, an advanced Conqueror's Haki infused attack can potentially slow down the regeneration of God Knights who have immortality hacks. Naturally, if it can work on the God Knights, it'll work on the Gorosei and Imu too. We don't know how long it can cancel out the regeneration though, because even though Gabin decapitates Summers in chapter 1149, Summers still somehow regenerates a bit later. Still, for what it's worth, in chapter 1152, Gabin does mention that they're not truly immortal. So let's wait and see what Oda cooks up. But hold on, before we're done with the video, I want to go over something that might be relevant to this discussion. It's the voice of all things. We know that observation users often describe what they sense as a voice, and we also know that some people are born with heightened observation Haki affinity, like Isa. So here's the question: what if the voice of all things is just a very specific advanced form of observation that only a handful of chosen people are born with? You see, the voice of all things lets someone communicate directly with people, animals, and even objects, without any speech or writing. Yes, it's not just understanding animal noises, it's more like a form of telepathy. And the crazy thing is that to everyone else, these conversations are completely inaudible. So far, only a tiny number of people have ever shown this ability. The Three-Eyed Tribe is the only known race that naturally has it, and even they need to awaken it through effort. For most others, it's something you're just born with. We've seen different levels of proficiency too. Roger, Oden, and Momonosuke could constantly hear the Sea Kings or Zunisha. Luffy, on the other hand, didn't seem to pick up the Sea Kings' voices as clearly, but they did note that he still picked up their voices, and later he was able to hear Zunisha when it cried for help. Also, it's not universal. Not everything in the world has a voice. So far, it's only been special beings like Sea Kings, Zunisha, or objects of massive significance like the poneglyphs. To add to this, hearing the voice doesn't mean you can read the poneglyphs. Roger could sense their meaning, but he couldn't fully decipher the text, and that pretty much covers everything we know so far about Haki and its crazy applications. But before we close out, there's one last thing worth mentioning: Devil Fruit negation. The basic idea behind this is that a strong enough will can suppress or even cancel a Devil Fruit's powers. For example, in chapter 1063, Law managed to undo the effects of the Sick Fruit with his will alone. This tells us that Haki can override Devil Fruits under the right conditions. However, it's not an absolute rule. The effectiveness depends a lot on the fruit itself. Oden, for example, had advanced Conqueror's Haki, yet he still couldn't get past the barrier fruit. This makes sense, as the very nature of a barrier fruit is to create an unbreakable shield. Take Doflamingo's birdcage, for example. The reason nobody could break the strings is because it's an awakened, user-sustained construct spread across the entire island. Its sheer scale and continuous input from the awakened user make it functionally unbreakable. While characters like Zoro and Fujitora could slow the contraction by pushing outward, they couldn't break the ability itself. But what if Kaido was in the birdcage? Then what? Well, why would Kaido waste his energy trying to rip through the cage when he could just one-shot Doflamingo directly and end it right there and then?